Concrete design codes define deflection limits to prevent occupant discomfort and safety concerns, damage of non-structural elements, and ponding and drainage issues. Welcome to the Bentley Systems training course, where you will learn how to specify deflections checks for an elevated concrete slab in RAM concept, so you can specify what and where deflection checks should be considered. This workflow is a multi-step process, including defining the deflection limit criteria, instructing the program where to check the slab for deflections, and then performing the calculation and reviewing the results. Now for this particular video, we will focus on specifying the deflection check criteria. So let's take a look at our sample model that has already been created in RAM concept. As you can see, the model geometry, loading, load combinations, and load history information has already been created. We are at the point in our workflow where we are ready to consider the deflection limits. For this particular model, our goal will be to check the main slab for deflection limits due to live load. And in addition to that, we're also going to ask the program to check the deflection on the perimeter of the slab due to the installation of the exterior cladding, which has already been defined on the cladding loading layer. Now that we've established our goal, let's get started by defining the deflection check criteria. To start that process, we will go to our menu bar, click Criteria, followed by Deflection Checks. Now before we create any deflection check criteria, let's take a look at two of the fields that will be required when instructing the program to add some deflection checks to your calculation. These are the deflection results layer and the difference result layer. In these fields, you can select a load case, a load combination, or a load history step that the program will use to calculate the desired deflection. If you select load cases or load combinations, RAM concept will report the elastic deflections, which do not consider cracking, creep, or shrinkage. If you select a load history step, however, RAM concept will report the deflections considering crack, creep, and shrinkage. So let's get started by creating our first deflection check. And for this deflection check, I'm going to check the slab for the live load deflection at approximately 181 days. So I'm going to name my deflection check as occupancy, instantaneous, live load. Then I'm going to select my deflection result layer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go with the occupancy instantaneous load. Next, I'm going to enter the information in the field for the difference result layer if needed. So I'm going to come down here and select another load history step. And this time I'm going to select floor finishes installed. Once I'm done, I can go ahead and click OK. Now, after creating a deflection check criteria, you can enter in the information for the upward and downward limits. Now, for this particular example, we're going to go with a downward limit of 0.75 inches. And we're going to say for an L over 360. In addition to checking the deflection for the live load in the main slab at 181 days after the pour, for this particular model, I'm also interested in investigating the live load deflection for the lifespan of the slab system. So let's go ahead and say let's add a deflection check. Let's go with a final instantaneous load and select our deflection results layers. Again, we're going to be using load history steps for this particular example. Now for this particular deflection, let's go ahead and say we want to look at a downward of L over 360. For this particular model, let's go ahead and add our last deflection check, which will be for our cladding live load. We're going to select our deflection results layer. And again, we're going to be using a load history step. And we're going to select our difference layer, which for this one is when the cladding is installed. Complete this process by clicking OK and enter in your limits. I'm going to say 0.25 inches with an L over 600. Of course, I would want to coordinate this type of information with the manufacturer of the cladding. Now, before we move on to the next step in our workflow, let's also discuss briefly this last field within this table, which is our deflection measure. Within this field, you're going to notice that you have two options, either total or relative. If you select total deflection, that means we're going to be calculating your deflection limits measured from the undisplaced position of the slab. And if you select relative deflection, this means we're measuring your deflection limits based on the displaced supports. For all three deflection checks for this particular model, we're going to leave this option set to total. Now at this point, we're ready to move on to the next step in our workflow, which is to specify where deflection checks shall be performed, which we will do in the next video in this series.
If you found this video helpful, please give it a like. If you want to see more such series, consider subscribing to our channel. Thank you, and see you next time.